there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. Today, we bring you the second of our 3 interviews conducted at the 2016 JALT conference. As we mentioned in our previous episodes, we hosted a forum titled Teacher Interviews, Stories of Transformation. This episode's interview is an interview between Rob and Ryuko Kubota. Professor Kubota works at the University of British Columbia, and her research themes are critical issues, neoliberalism, and racism in ELT.
So the theme of the conference is transformation.
Yes.
You've had a number of different transformations in your career, I think from originally being a junior and senior high school teacher to then being a professor of Japanese studies and now a professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education. Can you talk about some of those transformations?
Yes. So I was an English language teacher for junior high school for about 3 years in Nagano, Japan. And then after that, I taught English in senior high school in Kanagawa Prefecture for about 2 years. So altogether about 5 years of teaching experience in Japanese public schools. And then I got my master's degree from School for International Training in TESOL. And then I was looking for a job. And then an opportunity came up to teach Japanese as a foreign language at Montreal Institute for Studies in Education. It was just a summer program for 9 weeks. And then the director of the program said, okay, our teacher just quit, so would you like to stay for another year? And I said, sure. So then I really became an instructor of Japanese as a foreign language in North America. And then after 1 year, they said, would you like to, I said, I would like to stay forever. California is really nice. And then they said, no, you can't stay because you don't have a PhD degree. So then I went off to University of Toronto, Ontario Institute for Studies and Education, and then I got my PhD, and I went back to California to teach Japanese for another 3 years. And then opportunity came up to teach at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This time I had a joint appointment from the School of Education and the Department of Asian Studies. So I was partly involved in teacher education in foreign languages, including Japanese, K through 12, as well as ESL, K through 12. And teaching Japanese to undergraduate students. And then in 2009, another opportunity came up to move to Canada. So ever since, I have been teaching in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at UBC, mostly involved in teacher education and teaching graduate courses in applied linguistics. I actually taught undergraduate 4th year Japanese language course twice at UBC, and it was a great opportunity, but because I'm in Faculty of Education, it's been very difficult to teach in another department. So that's my experience, my transformation.
Right. And so we're at the JALT conference in Japan, in Nagoya this time. One area of ELT research that's kind of underrepresented by academics in Japan is the conversation school, the eikaiwa industry. So you've done some research about how the language learning motivations of students in these conversation schools don't often match the motivations of kind of other students, for example, to increase their cultural capital. Could you talk a bit about your findings in that area?
Okay, yeah. So I conducted my Eikaiwa research in 2007, funded by the Japan Foundation Fellowship. And I was interested in these adult Japanese learners of English, learning English in non-formal educational contexts like Eikaiwa school. Actually, I was interested in Eikaiwa Gakko, Eikaiwa schools, but the access was very difficult, right? So I ended up observing and interviewing these learners in local informal English club kind of arrangement where learners get together and then they find their own teacher, native speaker of English in the local community. They pay money to rent a room in the community center and then learn English, or Christian organization have the English conversation classroom every week and things like that. So I asked questions, why are you learning English? And it was interesting because there were some students who were learning English for future career, but many of them said, well, I don't know why I'm learning. So then through my interviews and observations, I learned that many of them are learning English for personal reasons, for pleasure, as a hobby, and as a leisure activities, just like doing karaoke, and playing golf, or playing tennis, and learning to cook, and things like that. So learning English actually provides the learners with social opportunities to interact with other like-minded people, to actually enjoy themselves. And so for them, it's not really about improving their language skills, but it's just as a hobby, enjoy themselves, and so forth. And also, Eikaiwa involves some language desire, right? And particularly in the context of Japan, where many young Japanese women learn English. Why? Well, some of them are actually interested in getting better jobs, but other people, other women, they just want to have this wonderful opportunity to be with Caucasian male native English-speaking teachers like yourselves. and it was interesting because I had an opportunity of interviewing an owner of English Conversation School. It's a very small school that he was operating, and he is a Japanese man who actually was fired by his company, and he used to be an engineer, and he really wanted to have this human relationship, because as an engineer he was just doing desk work, and he really missed human interaction, and so that's why he started to run this conversation school. But he told me all these Japanese female clients desire to have white native speaking male teachers and so forth. So it was quite interesting. So Eikaiwa actually have that component aspect of attracting language desire. And also, it's a huge industry, right? I mean, it's a huge money-making business. So it has, the economic side of it, particularly people who are preparing for TOEIC and TOEFL and things like that. There's not only IIBC that runs the TOEIC, but also related textbooks and all the preparation courses and all that. So it's a huge industry. So economic side. And also there's another ideology that if you learn English and if you become proficient in English, you will get a good job. It turned out that in my interviewers' experiences, one of them was a Japanese male who actually came back from a study abroad from Australia, and he was looking for a job. And he only had a TOEIC of less than 500 or around 500, so it's not very impressive. But he wanted to say, oh, I can speak English and I went to Australia, I have this experience and so forth. But then it turned out that that was not really valued by employers, right? So then he took out all the TOEIC score from his CV, and then he got hired by a very good company, local company. And he actually was a very good communicator. He was very outgoing, and after 6 months, he was transferred to the United States. And I think he is still working in Europe. So anyway, so there are lots of interesting stories, and if you're interested, you can read your article in 2011, linguistic instrumentalism and neoliberalism. So yes.
So we've touched on some points there connected to kind of critical issues in ELT, and that's been a focus of your work for a while, issues such as marginalized voices, ideologies, racism, and so on. What sparked your interest in those areas?
Okay, particularly in terms of racism and issues of race, I was interested in critically examining issues of cultural differences. So I wrote about cultural differences and ideologies. And when we look at cultural differences and ideology, we have to look at colonialism, discourses of colonialism, right? So racism is an integral part of colonial discourse and colonial ideology, right? So I wrote about it, and then I was criticized as attacking English teachers as racist. And I thought, oh, this is really strange. And then I think that was the beginning of my exploration of issues of race and racism, really. And race actually is not just individual racism, like individual bigotry and discrimination and things like that. Racism is also structural, right? So we have institutional racism. When you look at your school institution, how many of you are, white native speakers of English versus, native speakers of color versus Japanese teachers and so forth, right? So it's an institutional racism. And also racism is epistemological in terms of our knowledge, okay? So when we think of how we learned history, for example, in North America, history is taught from white perspectives, white settlers' perspective. It's not usually from indigenous people's perspectives, right? So racism should be discussed from individual, institutional, and epistemological perspectives. So, yes.
Okay. And you said that people criticised you for attacking teachers. You've written that teachers often kind of contest or resist the idea that racism is present in the field. Why do you think that is?
racism. I think because teachers consider themselves as nice people, right? I mean, we are all nice people, yes. However, because of that, the worldview or mindset that you mentioned, I think we tend to sort of deny, avoid, sensitive issues, right? And again, racism is not just individual things, it's institutional and epistemological. So I think if we expand the notion of racism, then I think it's easier for us to engage in critical issues of race.
Right. And so you wrote about this yourself in the late 1990s, I think, originally. And many people have been writing about these issues. For example, Penny Cook, Auerbach, is that how you pronounce it?
Auerbach, yeah.
Good. Kanekaraja, Philipson, and so on. Do you think that any substantial change has taken place in the industry as a result of that research and of that writing?
Research in about race, I'm not sure if these people that you mentioned directly work on issues of race. But I think the transformation happened very slowly, right? So I think things are changing, but very, very slowly. And one thing that I noticed this year is that the junior high school textbooks in Japan, government-approved textbooks, have been revised this year. And in the past, I always noticed that among all the characters I think there are 5 approved textbooks, right? Was it 5 or 6 approved textbooks? The native English-speaking teacher character was always represented as Caucasian female. But this year, one textbook projects this image of a native English-speaking teacher in the school as shaded female teacher. So this is a small change, but I hope the change will continue.
Okay. And in your more recent work, you've written about neoliberalism in language learning. And this is something that's been gaining attention, I think. There was a recent special issue of the Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development about neoliberalism. So what is neoliberalism?
What is neoliberalism?
And how does it relate to language learning?
Okay, yeah. So neoliberalism is based on the principle of free market economy, and also it's based on unregulated competition and alternative employment system, and more and more irregular, non-regular jobs have been created, more part-time jobs are created, and within this unstable employment system, each individual needs to develop his or her competitive edge. And this competitive edge can be developed through human capital, which is people's knowledge and skill. And in this new economy, the knowledge economy, where people are no longer doing physical work, but more brain work, language skill, communication skill is really important. So that's where the language education comes in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you've written about neoliberal paradoxes, particularly so kind of a disjoint between the rhetoric of language learning as a bridge between cultures, contrasted with increasing nationalism around the world. Could you talk about some of those paradoxes, maybe briefly?
In 1 minute, 30 seconds. Yeah. So yes. As you said, neoliberalism has promoted English language teaching, right? As we see in Japan. But at the same time, there's growing nationalism, and actually, the government, the Monkasho, the Minister of Education, has been promoting both English language education and within English language education, promotion of Japanese identity, right? So that leads to nationalism. So there's this dualism within this neoliberal promotion of English language teaching. So that is the sort of like a paradox, and I think we need to be aware of that, and I think we need to explore how we challenge this ideology, and nationalism could lead to really dangerous xenophobia and negative ways of interacting with each other in English. So we need to think about those issues.
Okay, thank you for the concise answer. We'll finish there. Maybe one more round of applause for Ryuko Kubota.
Thank you for listening. We'll provide a link to Professor Kubota's homepage in this podcast description. As usual, if you would like to contact us, you can send us an email at TEFLology@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. We are TEFLology. We also have a website, TEFLology-podcast.com. Please also consider leaving a review and a rating for us on iTunes. It helps us out a lot. So we'll be back with part 3 of our forum, an interview with J.D. Brown in a couple of weeks. Goodbye.